The penthouse on the Upper West Side was silent, the kind of silence bought with 7 years of marriage, 2 luxury cars, and a lot of unsaid resentment. Mark traced the condensation on his whiskey glass, the city lights of Manhattan blurring into an expensive, deceptive piece. Then the phone vibrated with a single, encrypted message. I told him everything. The surface was glass, but the secret beneath was concrete, and it was about to shatter the foundation of his perfect life. If the chilling intimacy of secrets and the crushing weight of their consequences resonate with you, stay with me. There is so much more hidden behind these closed doors. The scent of expensive oak and old money clung to the air of the Ashton master bedroom, a kind of invisible varnish on the polished surface of their life. Mark stood at the window of their Upper West Side penthouse, the city below a silent, glittering testament to his success. 7 years, 2 children. The marriage to Clara was not a romance anymore. It was an institution, impeccably run, profitable, and cold. They operated on a strict calendar, their conversations efficient, focused on school fees, board meetings, and the next Hamptons weekend. The geometry of their shared space was defined by silence. Clara was already asleep, positioned precisely in the center of her side of the custom-made king bed. Even in repose, she projected the professional composure of a senior corporate lawyer, neat, decisive, and untouchable. Mark didn't want to touch her. He hadn't, not really, for months. The absence was a quiet agreement, a mutual withdrawal of emotional investment, hidden from their staff and their social circle. He poured himself a single malt, the sound of the ice cubes clicking against the heavy crystal the only interruption to the city's low, distant hum. The light from the living room cast long, severe shadows across the antique Persian rug. It was 11:47 p.m. Too late for a work email, too early for a decent sleep. It was the hour reserved for contemplation, or lately, for guilt. His phone, resting on the granite counter of the wet bar, vibrated once. A single notification, bypassing the locked screen. It was not a text message. It was a ping from a secure, encrypted messaging app he only used for one person. Elena. I told him everything. The message was brutal in its conciseness. Him, not her, not Clara. The initial shock wasn't panic, but a chilling jolt of cold realization. The precarious, perfectly balanced facade had cracked, but the shrapnel wasn't flying yet. Elena, his affair in Chicago, the passionate, reckless escape he'd indulged in during quarterly trips, had finally acted. Mark stared at the glass in his hand. He was expecting the confession to come via a drunken call to Clara, a desperate email sent to their shared family address, or a dramatic confrontation in a public place. He was prepared for hysteria, for noise. But this was calculated. Who was him? He ran through the possibilities, his mind clicking through names and social circles like a faulty hard drive. A colleague? Her editor? Her husband? She was technically separated, but the paperwork was perpetually delayed. A sudden, deeper dread took hold. He lowered the whiskey glass, the condensation leaving a wet ring on the polished wood. I told him everything. The only him that could possibly control the fallout of this specific affair, the only person whose knowledge could neutralize the social and legal nuclear option Clara held, was someone in their shared professional orbit, someone with leverage. He instinctively checked the bedroom door. Clara remained motionless, the perfect image of a wife betrayed in her sleep. Mark found himself standing on the precipice of a choice: delete the message, pour another drink, and live in the rapidly diminishing fiction of his marriage, or reply and plunge into the necessary, messy chaos of truth. He tapped the screen. His fingers were steady, a testament to years of forced composure in high-stakes boardrooms. Mark. The 3 letters hung there, a silent demand for the identity of the bomb maker. He waited, the hum of the city amplifying in the vacuum of the silence. A minute passed. 2. The screen remained blank. Elena was forcing him to wait, forcing him to stew in the consequence of his own deceit. The cold dread began to morph into something like resentment, then a strange, dark resolve. Finally, the reply came, not as a text, but as a new event, a digital invitation on his personal calendar. The Café. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. Beneath the event name was a single, curt note, the kind of brutal honesty he hadn't experienced since leaving his college dorm. You need to hear the truth from me, and then we make the quiet move. Be there, Mark. Mark did not delete the message. He didn't reply. He knew he had lost control of the narrative, but he hadn't lost the war yet. He looked at his wife, perfectly composed in the darkness, and knew that tomorrow, the quietest day of his life, was about to begin, and it would destroy everything.
The downtown cafe was a study in gentrified hustle, exposed brick, reclaimed wood, and the low, incessant hiss of the espresso machine. It was 7:02 a.m., and the weekday crowd was already in motion, clutching paper cups and scrolling through early morning news feeds. Mark hated the manufactured intimacy of the place, but he recognized the strategic neutrality. No one here knew Mark Ashton, the financier from the Upper West Side, nor would they recognize Elena Flores, the investigative journalist from Chicago. Elena was already at a small table pushed into a quiet corner, away from the glass front. She wore an expensive but slightly rumpled trench coat, an outfit that spoke of long nights and a professional disregard for Manhattan trends. When Mark slid into the seat opposite her, she did not offer a greeting. She didn't even meet his eye immediately, choosing instead to watch the steam rise from her untouched black coffee. "Who?" Mark asked, his voice low, controlled, echoing the one he used in high-pressure negotiation rooms. He didn't ask why, because he knew why. Elena had tired of the half-life he offered her. He just needed the name of the third party. Elena finally looked up. Her eyes, usually alive with the bright, challenging intelligence that had first drawn him in, were dull with fatigue and resolve. "Gabriel," she said, the name dropping into the space between them like a stone in a still pond. The name hit Mark with the force of an actual blow, making his composure falter for the first time. Gabriel Vance? The name was not just a name, it was a cornerstone of his and Clara's life. Gabriel was Clara's law partner at Sterling & Moore, the closest thing either of them had to a confidant in their professional and social sphere. He was the godfather to their youngest daughter. "Vance?" Mark repeated, disbelief warring with rising panic. "You told Gabriel?" "Not in a screaming match," Elena clarified, her tone steady, devoid of drama. "I told him last night, in the lobby bar near his office. I gave him the facts, who we are, what we've been doing, and for how long. I didn't ask for money or vengeance, I just laid the truth on the table, the same way you lay out a quarterly report." Mark felt a sudden, sickening shift in the power dynamic. Elena had bypassed the emotional battlefield entirely and gone straight to the structural supports of his life. Telling Clara would have been messy, public, and expensive, but manageable within the confines of a domestic dispute. Telling Gabriel Vance was an execution. It involved professional ethics, partnership reviews, and the ruthless scrutiny of their shared social set. Gabriel had more to lose from a messy public scandal than either Mark or Elena. "You were always smarter than me," Mark said, the words heavy with unwilling admiration and utter defeat. "But why him? Why not just end it with me?" "Because you wouldn't," Elena countered, tentatively taking a sip of her coffee, her gaze unwavering. "You would have kept me on a drip feed of promises, a side note to your perfect life, until I disintegrated. And because Gabriel Vance controls the professional ecosystem you and Clara live in, you are a client. Clara is his partner. You needed a clean break, Mark. I needed to ensure it happened, not for me, but for the damage control." She leaned forward, her voice lowering to a calculated whisper. "The quiet move, Mark, is that Gabriel is going to manage the dissolution. He can't let the scandal hit the firm. He can't afford for Clara's professional integrity to be questioned in a bitter divorce proceeding, and he certainly can't afford for your firm to pull their accounts from Sterling & Moore." The brilliance of the betrayal was staggering. Elena hadn't been aiming for Mark's heart. She was aiming for his wallet and his reputation. By involving Gabriel, she had essentially turned their affair into a hostile takeover bid, forcing a quiet, strategic retreat. "He agreed to this?" Mark asked, a metallic taste rising in his throat. "He agreed to mitigate the damage," Elena corrected. He outlined the separation terms already. No emotional mess, no public accusations, a clean legal framework already drafted. You initiate the filing today, quietly. Clara will be blindsided by the paperwork, not the tears. It's cold, Mark, but it's the only way to save the core assets, your reputation, your children's stability, and Clara's career. Mark looked past her, through the large glass window to the streaming Manhattan traffic. The city that had always felt like his oyster suddenly felt like a perfectly designed cage. He was being maneuvered, stripped of his own agency by the woman who loved him and the friend who was supposed to protect his wife. He had craved honesty, and Elena had given it to him. But it was a cold, unsentimental truth wrapped in legal strategy. He was trading his moral dignity for professional survival. And the choice, he realized, was already made. What do I tell Clara when she asks about Gabriel? Nothing, Elena said simply, pushing the document envelope across the table. It was thin, beige, and utterly final. It was the death certificate of his marriage, signed and notarized by his lover and his friend. He stood up, leaving his untouched jacket on the back of the chair. He had an email to write and a life to dismantle.
Mark stood outside Gabriel Vance's office on the 50th floor, the cold granite and brushed steel of the law firm feeling less like a place of justice and more like a fortress of quiet power. He was an intruder in this building, a client by proxy, but more accurately, an accomplice. Gabriel's secretary, efficient and perfectly neutral, ushered him into the inner office without preamble. Gabriel was at his massive mahogany desk, reviewing documents that were conspicuously not the ones Mark had just received. He looked every bit the high-powered partner. Custom suit, silver-flecked hair impeccably styled, an air of measured authority that had always made Mark feel slightly less substantial. Gabriel did not offer a handshake. He gestured toward a leather armchair and spoke without looking up. "You have the envelope from Elena?" It was not a question. "I do," Mark confirmed, settling heavily into the chair. The office was vast, overlooking the entirety of Central Park, a view that screamed of untouchable success. "I need to understand this, Gabriel. Why are you involved? Why the need for a covert alliance?" Gabriel finally set down his pen. His eyes, usually warm and familiar, were now hard professional. "My involvement is a matter of triage, Mark. A messy, public divorce between you and Clara doesn't just hurt your families, it jeopardizes my firm's reputation, Clara's partnership track, and the standing of your investment group, one of our key clients. The goal here is not morality, it is control." "So, professional courtesy?" Mark asked, the cynicism sharp. "Survival," he corrected. "Elena came to me because she knew I was the most powerful vector for ensuring a silent, swift resolution. If she had gone straight to Clara, Clara's first move would have been emotional, fueled by spite and public exposure, which in turn fuels legal chaos. I prevented that. The quiet move ensures that Clara is confronted with a legal fait accompli, not a histrionic confession." Gabriel picked up the beige envelope Mark carried and laid it open on the desk. Inside were the drafted separation agreements, dry, detailed, financially devastating yet meticulously fair under New York law. They outlined asset division, custody schedules, and a surprisingly generous spousal support package. "This is generous," Mark noted, scanning the figures. "It has to be," Gabriel stated. "This is the price of keeping this contained. You give Clara undeniable financial security, she gives us silence. The papers state irreconcilable differences, signed and sealed before anyone on the outside, or Clara for that matter, can connect the dots to Elena. We maintain the narrative that your marriage simply ran its course." Mark leaned back, the leather creaking softly. The depth of the deceit was astonishing, yet undeniably effective. He was betraying Clara by ending their marriage, and now he was betraying her trust by using her friend, her professional ally, to strategically execute the split. The ethical debt he was accruing felt heavier than the financial one. "You'll never forgive me for involving you."
She won't know I was involved in the drafting until much later, perhaps never, Gabriel dismissed, his voice smooth. She'll just see that you had the legal foresight to act quickly. My part is to ensure these documents are filed today before she has any inkling. I will run interference at the firm, ensuring any inquiries into her sudden marital instability are preemptively managed. You go home tonight and act as you have for the past 7 years, distant, preoccupied, but ultimately normal. The conversation felt less like plotting a divorce and more like planning a hostile corporate merger. There was no emotion, no recognition of the human cost, only strategy and stake mitigation. Mark had sought a fleeting emotional connection with Elena, and in return he was receiving a cold, professional dismantling of his life. He looked at Gabriel, the man who delivered their youngest child's baptism speech. When the truth comes out, that you were the mole, it will destroy her. Gabriel met his gaze, completely unrepentant. When your truth comes out, Mark, the consequences will be less about Clara and more about your firm's reputation. I am protecting my interests and, by extension, yours. Clara is a highly rational, professional woman. She understands leverage. Once the financial terms are locked, her emotional leverage vanishes. That is the quiet move. Mark signed the preliminary documents, his signature feeling like a forgery, a deliberate act of erasing 7 years of commitment. He was buying his freedom with the currency of deceit, and the price was his own moral dignity. He left the building with the sickening awareness that he was now irrevocably bound to Gabriel and Elena, not by love, but by a shared, ugly secret, one that was about to land on Clara's desk, not as a painful whisper, but as a formal, dry notification.
Clara Ashton received the email at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. She was in the middle of a high-stakes meeting regarding a corporate takeover, sharp and unassailable in her role as lead counsel. The email pinged, tucked away in the personal miscellaneous folder her assistant managed. It wasn't marked urgent, but the subject line had a chilling formality that cut through her concentration. Matter, Ashton, M. V. Ashton, C. Notice of filing. Clara excused herself, citing an urgent client matter, and retreated to the solitude of her private office. The walls were lined with leather-bound legal histories and awards, a monument to her relentless ambition. She opened the email. Attached was a single PDF, digitally stamped and signed. Mark's lawyer, a formidable partner from a firm known for its surgical precision in high-net-worth divorce cases. She didn't need to read the covering letter. The contents of the attached petition for dissolution of marriage were enough. It cited the standard, irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. It contained a meticulously detailed breakdown of their assets, a proposed custody schedule for their 2 children, and, most jarringly, a drafted marital settlement agreement, MSA, already outlining the division of wealth. Clara did not scream. She did not cry. Her reaction was clinical, a total immersion into her professional self. She was not a wife being betrayed. She was a senior partner being blindsided by a low-grade legal ambush. The financial figures were accurate. The proposed spousal support was surprisingly generous. The custody terms were favorable to her career schedule. The sheer competence of the filing was what truly wounded her. There was no rage, no emotional sloppiness, no room for negotiation on passion, just cold, effective strategy. She gripped the mouse, her knuckles white against the dark wood of her desk. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. In her mind, the discovery of any infidelity, a risk she knew their emotional distance allowed, would have been loud, messy, and cathartic. It would have involved accusations whispered in the hallway, suitcases thrown, a desperate confrontation that acknowledged the weight of their 7 years. Instead, she had this, a dry, impersonal legal document that treated the relationship like a failing business to be liquidated. Mark hadn't offered a tearful apology or a desperate explanation. He had offered a settlement offer. Irretrievable breakdown. The phrase, so innocuous in legal context, felt like a slap. It implied shared failure, mutual drifting. It completely erased the possibility of a specific, tangible transgression, an affair, which she now realized must be the catalyst.
This legal maneuver was designed to contain the narrative, to ensure that the divorce was viewed by the outside world as an amicable, high-class decoupling, protecting both their reputations. She immediately cross-referenced the custody agreement with her son's upcoming school calendar. It was perfectly slotted. The draft MSA allocated the Hamptons property to her. Meticulous. Too meticulous. Clara picked up her secured phone and pressed a button for her internal line. She didn't call her own lawyer. She didn't call Mark. She called Gabriel Vance. Gabriel was her mentor, her closest confidant at the firm, the only person who understood the excruciating pressure of maintaining their social and professional position. He would know the unspoken rules of this game. Gabriel, it's Clara. I just received a filing from Mark's counsel. Disillusion. Have you seen it? Her voice was tight, betraying only professional stress, not personal pain. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end. I haven't, Clara. I'm tied up with the Sterling acquisition. You know that. My God, Mark actually filed? I'm so sorry. I'll ask my assistant to pull it from the e-filing system immediately. But tell me, how bad is it? Financially, I mean. His response was perfect. Concerned, focused on the professional aspects. Exactly what she needed to hear. Yet, something in the way he hadn't asked if she was okay, only how bad the numbers were, struck a discordant note. It's clean, Gabriel. Too clean. The MSA is pre-drafted. This wasn't a sudden decision on Mark's part. Someone coached him. Someone who understands our assets and our professional liabilities intimately. She stared at the allocation of assets, particularly the complex trust structure Mark's firm controlled. Someone who knows exactly how to make this quiet, how to contain the collateral damage. Well, you know Mark, Gabriel chuckled, a low, familiar sound. He manages everything like a hedge fund. We'll fight it, of course, but Clara, listen to me. The generosity in the MSA gives us leverage. We portray him as panicked. Don't worry. You have me. We'll rip this apart. Clara hung up, comforted by his immediate support, but the cold dread lingered. Mark's move hadn't been emotional. It was a military strike. He had chosen the path of least personal resistance, prioritizing professional survival over giving his wife the basic dignity of an honest conversation. This realization hardened her resolve. She wiped the residual moisture from her palms, closed the PDF, and picked up her notepad. She would not let Mark or his invisible coach win this quietly. She would analyze the document, find the weakness, and use the sheer professionalism of his betrayal to fuel her counterattack. The emotional damage was immense, but the tactical insult was unforgivable.
Clara spent the next 48 hours submerged in the divorce documents, a state of hyper-focused, analytical rage. She treated the marital settlement agreement not as a document of heartbreak, but as a hostile legal proposal that contained a subtle, yet critical, flaw. The MSA was airtight, reflecting an intimate, almost preternatural knowledge of their complex financial ecosystem. It accounted for non-liquid assets, offshore holdings, and future equity from Mark's firm's upcoming IPO, details that only Mark, his personal wealth manager, and perhaps Gabriel Vance would have access to, given their professional intersections. But the flaw wasn't in the numbers. It was in the timing and the phrasing regarding a particular property acquisition in Aspen, completed 3 years prior. This specific structure, a complicated deed transfer designed to maximize tax benefits, was a proprietary strategy used almost exclusively by Sterling & Moore's top-tier corporate clients like Mark's firm. Clara herself had briefly consulted on the transaction using a specific, niche legal term for the transfer of a limited partnership interest. The drafted MSA used that exact niche terminology, a word Mark, a finance executive, would never use unless it was dictated to him by a lawyer who specialized in that specific area. Clara leaned back, her office chair protesting faintly against the weight of her realization. Mark's external counsel was a known generalist, skilled in litigation, but not this esoteric tax law. This term, used precisely twice in the 100-page filing, was Gabriel Vance's professional signature. The air in the room suddenly felt thin,
compressed by the weight of the invisible evidence. It was a cold, cruel form of signature, hidden in plain legal sight. She didn't call Gabriel. Instead, she walked the 300 feet down the long, silent corridor to his office. The secretary gave her a tight, sympathetic smile, the kind reserved for colleagues going through an amicable split. Gabriel was on a conference call, his voice a steady murmur of authority. Clara waited, standing silently just inside the threshold, a woman carved from granite. When Gabriel finally ended the call and looked up, the usual warmth in his eyes flickered, replaced by a fractional, momentary panic that she, a lawyer trained to read microexpressions, instantly cataloged. "Clara? What a surprise. I was just about to call you. How are you holding up?" He rose, offering a practiced, comforting gesture with his hand, but she stepped back, refusing the touch. "The MSA," she stated, her voice unnervingly quiet. "The language regarding the Aspen Properties Limited Partnership Transfer, Section 4.3, Subsection B." Gabriel's face maintained a flawless expression of confusion. "Yes? What about it? Standard boilerplate, I imagine?" "It's not boilerplate, Gabriel. It uses the term proprietary transfer interest. That's a term we developed for the St. Regis account last year. It's unique to Sterling and Moore, and specifically to your team. Mark's divorce lawyer wouldn't have it. He wouldn't know to use it." She took one slow, deliberate step closer, crowding his enormous desk. "Marks did not just hire a lawyer to prepare for divorce, Gabriel. He hired a strategist to eliminate the possibility of a fight. And that strategist was you. You knew. You knew about the affair and you advised him on the legal maneuver to contain the fallout." The composure finally fractured. Gabriel's shoulders dropped, and he lowered himself back into his chair, defeat washing over his features. The silence was louder than any shouting could have been, filled with the crushing sound of trust being pulverized. "Clara, it wasn't my choice," he murmured, his eyes now pleading. "I was brought in by the other party. To stabilize the situation, the firm couldn't afford a spectacle. You know this. I was protecting you both, professionally." "Protecting me?" Clara's voice was lethal, finally rising slightly above a whisper. "You broke bread with us. You watched my children. You sat across from me in partnership meetings, knowing my husband was being advised on how to legally preempt my devastation. You didn't protect me. You provided the blueprints for my betrayal." The realization was more devastating than the divorce itself. The infidelity was personal, painful but contained. Gabriel's act was institutional. It was a cold, calculated strike against her integrity, executed by the person who was supposed to be her strongest professional ally. Mark had betrayed their love. Gabriel had betrayed her very belief in loyalty and partnership. Clara turned, walking away from the pristine view and the silent defeat of her colleague. She didn't need to hear his justifications. She had been blindsided, not by a single secret, but by a complex conspiracy involving her husband, his mistress, and the architect of her professional life. The quiet move had succeeded in buying Mark's silence, but for Clara, the discovery of this third betrayal had ignited a cold, vengeful determination. Elena sat in the sterile, fluorescent quiet of her temporary office in the financial district. The remnants of her affair, a thin manila folder of notes, encrypted messages, and a profound sense of moral nausea spread across her desk. The quiet move had been successful. Mark had filed the papers. Clara was responding with legal rigor, not public fury. Gabriel Vance was running professional interference, keeping the firm's prestige intact. The mechanism had worked perfectly. And yet, Elena felt cold.
She had secured a coveted position covering wealth and ethics for a major online investigative magazine, a career coup achieved partly through the grit of her portfolio and partly through the ruthless clarity of her mind. But the collateral damage, the image of Clara's dignified, unwitting betrayal, and the knowledge that Gabriel's career now hung by the thread of a carefully managed secret, weighed on her. She had sought truth, but the truth had felt less like liberation and more like an improvised explosive device. Her editor, David, leaned against the doorframe, a tall, perpetually tired man who lived for the digital headline. That piece on high net worth marital stress, you promised me a powerful narrative, Elena, something that taps into the anxiety beneath the suburban mansions. Where is it? It's coming, Elena replied, pushing the folder away. It needs sensitivity. It's not just about money, it's about the emotional fraud required to maintain that level of status. Emotional fraud sells, David countered. We need a case study, anonymous, of course, a look behind the curtain of the perfect NYC marriage that dissolved not through passion, but cold financial calculation, a quiet destruction. You know these people, Elena. Give me the anatomy of a high-class split. Why is the law firm involved before the family therapist? David's request hit too close. He wanted the architecture of the very act she had orchestrated. The pressure to deliver a career-defining piece clashed violently with her journalistic ethics. Could she exploit the destruction she had helped create? Was there any way to write the truth without committing a final, ultimate act of betrayal against the people whose lives she had fractured? She pulled up a blank document and began to write. Not a story, but an exercise in objectivity. She chose to focus on the phenomenon, divorcing the facts from the names. She wrote about the American dream as an economic contract, where marriage became a merger and dissolution required strategic planning. In the gilded cages of New York's elite, betrayal rarely arrives in a scandalous headline. It arrives in a beige envelope from a lawyer. The infidelity is often secondary to the strategic cleanup required to protect the real assets, reputation, and share value. The emotional cost is simply the premium paid for damage control. She wrote about the isolation of the wronged spouse, blindsided not by a confession, but by a legal coup de grace. She wrote about the complicity of the social circle, where friendship was easily sacrificed to maintain professional alliances. She crafted an anonymous narrative so close to Mark and Clara's, the successful financier and the high-powered lawyer, that every detail felt like a thinly veiled confession. Her conscience whispered that this was self-justification, a way to cleanse her guilt by publicizing the phenomenon. She was trading personal responsibility for professional acclaim. Yet her professional instinct argued that the truth she sought to protect, the toxic reality of their controlled existence, was a valid story that deserved to be told. She meticulously avoided any explicit mention of Gabriel or the proprietary legal terminology, but she hinted at the involvement of a trusted professional intermediary who prioritized the firm's portfolio over personal loyalty. When she finished the draft, it was sharp, analytical, and deeply painful. It was her confession and her defense, hidden in the guise of social critique. She sent the piece to David with a single line. It's anonymous. It's objective. It's the anatomy of the quiet move. As she shut down her computer, Elena knew the article would resonate, not just because it exposed the rich, but because it laid bare the truth that the most devastating betrayals are often the ones carried out in absolute, controlled silence. She had secured her career, but she had paid for it with the last remnants of her moral peace. The clock was ticking until the piece went live, turning their private calamity into a public, albeit anonymous, commentary.
Mark walked into the penthouse foyer, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him. The air was frigid, the silence tonight a different beast than the usual marital vacuum. It was a pressurized, expectant silence. He was 2 hours late for the children's dinner, a detail Clara would normally document and file away for later strategic use. Tonight, she was waiting. She was in the study, bathed in the cool light of the desk lamp, not reading a brief, but holding a physical copy of a prominent online magazine's latest edition, printed on glossy paper. He recognized the headline immediately, even before he saw the date. The Quiet Dissolution, when the American marriage is liquidated, not broken. Clara looked up, and Mark stopped short. Her face was calm, her expression not one of fury, but of deep, surgical contempt. I signed the final documents this afternoon. They were filed 10 minutes ago. We are officially done, Mark, legally and financially. Mark nodded, relief struggling with the sickening familiarity of his own guilt. I'm glad we could handle this maturely, Clara, for the children. Maturely? Clara placed the magazine on the desk, smoothing out the cover with a deliberate, slow movement. You confuse maturity with cowardice, Mark. You chose to initiate the end of our marriage with a legal filing orchestrated by my law partner Gabriel Vance instead of a conversation. You chose to protect your firm's stock price over offering your wife the dignity of an honest confession. The mention of Gabriel's name was the final, devastating blow. Mark felt the strategic ground crumble beneath him. He had believed the legal machinery would keep this final piece of treachery sealed, buying him a clean exit. I don't know what you're talking about, Mark lied, the words tasting like ash. Clara smiled, a brittle, terrible expression. Don't waste the last moments of our partnership on a lie. The proprietary transfer language, Mark. Only Gabriel's team uses it. You didn't just hire a lawyer. You conspired with my trusted partner to execute a hostile preemptive legal maneuver designed to neutralize my emotional leverage. The infidelity, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes like chips of ice, was forgivable. The architecture of your deceit, the use of my friend against me, that is unforgivable. She pushed the magazine toward him. And this is the consequence of your quiet move, Mark. Elena's article. She laid out our anatomy for the world to see. She described a high-flying executive who trades his moral integrity for financial control, who chooses professional stability over personal truth. It's anonymous, of course, but everyone who matters will read it and recognize the blueprint. Mark stared at the glossy page. Elena had used our story as a cathartic backdrop for her critique, fulfilling her need for truth while simultaneously guaranteeing the public glare they had tried to avoid. The quiet move had only postponed the noise, turning it into a deeper, more pervasive hum of public scrutiny. She gave me the move to protect us, Mark argued, a pathetic defense. She gave you the move to force your hand and secure her career, Clara retorted, standing up. And Gabriel took the move to protect his firm. You were merely the asset they both managed. You thought you were controlling the narrative, but you were just the central figure in everyone else's strategy. She walked past him, heading toward the bedroom, her movement fluid. Final. She paused at the threshold. You wanted quiet, Mark. You have it now, she said, her voice dropping to a low, devastating pitch. You are financially clean, legally secure, and utterly alone. You traded genuine emotional connection for a meticulously planned severance package, and that is the true cost of your quiet move. Enjoy your silence. The bedroom door closed with a soft, definitive sound that echoed the finality of a judge's babble. Mark stood in the foyer, the city lights reflecting coldly on the glass of his trophy apartment, holding a magazine that detailed the collapse of his life. He had won the legal battle, avoiding the costly explosive divorce he feared, but in doing so, he had lost his dignity, his friend, and any chance of redemption, leaving him with only the cold, sterile quiet he had paid such a price for.
6 months later, the silence in the penthouse was absolute. Mark was no longer battling legal filings or managing covert meetings. He was battling the weight of his own solitude. The divorce was finalized, the assets split exactly as Gabriel's initial strategic outline had dictated. Clara had moved to the Aspen property with the children, a settlement concession she had extracted with cold efficiency. She maintained her partnership at Sterling & Moore, her reputation professionally intact, albeit socially scarred by the vague, powerful anonymity of Elena's article. Mark had won the financial war, retaining the valuable New York assets and his position at the firm, but he found his victory empty. The pristine, modern apartment, once a symbol of his achievement, now felt like a mausoleum of a life he had deliberately killed. He often stood at the window, looking out over Manhattan, the city that had once energized him, now mirroring his cold, isolating success. He tried to reconcile with Elena, believing that after all the maneuvering, they were finally free to build a legitimate relationship. He called her in Chicago, offering a ticket back to New York, an opportunity to stop hiding. "It's over, Mark," she told him over the phone.
her voice distant, professional, like the protagonist of her own successful article. The truth I needed was the separation, the finality, not a new relationship built on the ashes of the old. I needed to see that you would pay the price, however coldly, and you did. Now I have my career, and you have your quiet life. Her rejection was definitive, a final acknowledgement that she had used him as much as he had used her for an escape. Elena's article was still circulating, a touchstone in online discussions about the pitfalls of wealth and status. It had elevated her career, but she carried the psychological scar of the destruction she had wrought. Gabriel Vance had also survived. Clara, demonstrating her professional rigor, had chosen not to expose him as complicity in the legal community. Instead, she let the silent threat hang over him, a knowledge that bound them in a toxic professional truce. Gabriel remained a partner, but he had lost his goddaughter and the casual, comfortable trust of his closest friends. Mark's life was measured now by the precise geometry of his routine, the silent walk to the office, the sterile meetings, the measured sip of whiskey alone at night. He had everything the world valued: capital, freedom, and a lack of public scandal. Yet he was haunted by the knowledge that the quiet move had not saved him from pain. It had merely transformed the pain of passion into the chronic ache of moral compromise. One evening, he received a short email from Clara's private address, months after the divorce. It wasn't a request for funds or a discussion about the children. It contained a single line: "The children ask about why Uncle Gabriel never calls anymore." It was a final, cold reminder that the most damaging consequence of his calculated deceit wasn't the loss of his wife, but the contamination of every sincere relationship he once held. The price of avoiding the messy emotional truth was the permanent loss of trust, a quiet, enduring legacy that left Mark Ashton wealthy, free, and utterly bankrupt of human connection. The silence he had bought was not peace. It was the chilling sound of isolation.